August 6, 1945, marked the first public announcement of the greatest scientific achievement in history. The atomic bomb, first tested in New Mexico on July 16, 1945, had just been used against a military target. This is how the Manhattan Engineer District report, supervised by General Leslie Groves, the head of the Manhattan Project, describes the bombing of Hiroshima. Public announcement is euphemism for the death of hundreds of thousands of people, and the word greatest to describe this scientific achievement is arguably only correct if by greatest you mean the most far-ranging. What has been unleashed on humanity is a weapon of horrible proportions, several magnitudes greater than any other weapon created before. Soon it will be surpassed by even greater weapons of mass destruction, and to this day, their very existence threatens our very existence on this planet. In 2024, that threat is again closer to us than in many decades, and in some observers' views, we have grown complacent and forgotten what they really mean. So please stay with us as we explore the true impact of the atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th, 1945. They are events that we must never forget. Our survival depends on it. This is episode 139 of War Against Humanity, a series of World War II in real time. I'm Spartacus Olsson. Our lives, all of our lives, change on July 16, 1945 at 5:29 a.m. Midwestern Time on the Alamogordo bombing and gunnery range 230 miles south of Los Alamos with the Trinity test. There and then, Gadget, the world's first nuclear bomb, detonates with somewhere between 15 to 20 kilotons of force. As soon as the test has happened, the sinister effects of atomic bombs begin to impact some of our fellow human beings. The secrecy surrounding this new weapon and the Trinity test are extremely tight. While the governor of New Mexico has been informed, the population has not. The test site is deliberately remote and far removed from urban centers, but some ranchers live as close as 13 miles or 20 kilometers from the test site, and within a 50-mile or 80-kilometer radius lie the homes of 13,470 people. In that perimeter, on this day, 12 young teenage girls are at a dance summer camp with their teacher. The bomb shakes the ground so hard that they are thrown out of their bunk beds. Barbara Kent is one of them. It was the biggest jolt you could imagine. We were all sitting there on the floor wondering what was happening. Mrs. Dean thought the water heater had exploded, so we rushed outside. It was just after 5:30 and it should have been dark, but it was like the sun had been turned on. Despite the strange event, the girls and their teacher get back to their usual routine. Then, in the afternoon, another rather peculiar thing happens. We all thought, oh my gosh, it's July and it's snowing. Yet it was real warm. We put it on our hands and were rubbing it on our face. We were all having such a good time, trying to catch what we thought was snow, catching it on our tongues like snowflakes. But this is not snow. The 12 girls have just touched, smothered their faces with, and even put on their tongue nuclear fallout ashes. Barbara Kent is the only one of them who will survive past the age of 40. But the effects go far beyond those who happen to actually touch large amounts of contaminated matter. 2 years from now, in 1947, Catherine Benke, a healthcare provider from Roswell, New Mexico, writes a letter to Stafford Warren, a radiologist and safety chief of the Trinity operation. She is alarmed at the sharp rise in infant deaths in the months after the test. As I recall, in August 1945, the month after the first bomb was tested in New Mexico, there were about 35 infant deaths here. I understand the rate at Alamogordo near the site of the test was even higher than Roswell. Her letter is promptly answered by Warren's assistant saying that there is no link between infant mortality and fallout, stating that the safety and health of the people at large is not in any way endangered. The U.S. government will maintain this position for 70 years, and to this day, the downwinders, those affected by the fallout from Trinity, battle for recognition and compensation for the deaths of loved ones and their own cancer-ridden health histories. like one resident from Tularosa Basin, Gloria Herrera, who will have a list of 285 friends and family in the community that have died from cancer since the Trinity test. Back in July 1945, these adverse effects of nuclear arms is more than suspected, it's expected. Radiation poisoning is already an understood phenomena, and the efficiency projections, should these weapons be used, factors in death and injury from radiation. The man who has to make this decision, if they should now be used, is U.S. President Harry S. Truman. He faces a difficult and obscure situation. While the war in Europe is over since almost 3 months, in the Pacific it rages on. The end date of the conflict is mostly still uncertain, at least from the Allied vantage point. By any evidence, despite horrific losses, the Japanese do not look ready to give up. The Battle of Okinawa from April 1st to June 22nd, 1945 indicated that the closer the war gets to the Japanese home islands, the more determined and frantic Japanese resistance becomes. 15,000 U.S. soldiers lose their lives on the bloody beaches and treacherous hinterland of the island before it rests in American hands. Even more shocking to the Allies is that in the defense of one relatively small, albeit strategically important island, 100,000 Japanese soldiers lay down their lives in the name of Japan and the Emperor. It leaves the U.S. president with a troubling question how far they will go to defend their home island, and how many American lives it will cost. Moreover, how long will it take to break the Japanese spirit by conventional means? The validity of this question is further driven home by that, in July 1945, most big Japanese cities have already been reduced to cinders and rubble by the relentless Allied bombing campaigns. Tokyo, the capital, is nothing but a field of burnt-out husks. Japanese shipping is almost completely hamstrung by the Allied naval blockade, the strategic mining of ports and shipping lanes, and the submarines hunting everywhere around the islands. Yet, despite all this, the Japanese refused to surrender. With a Potsdam Declaration on July 26, 1945, the Allies give Japan one last chance to surrender unconditionally, with the only other alternative offered being the, quote, prompt and utter destruction of Japan. This demand is met with silence. Truman now has the choice to make true on this threat by a prolonged conventional war or by showing that prompt and utter destruction can be achieved with a single bomb. What Truman does not know is that Japan is in fact close to surrender, and the silence from Tokyo is possibly one of the greatest tragedies in history. Behind that silence, since 1944, peace doves and war hawks have been wrestling over Japan's way forward. The hawks, like War Minister General Anami, advocate a fight to the very death, if need be, of every Japanese man, woman, and child. The doves see the futility of this approach. Japan has already lost the war. In a cabinet meeting on June 26, 1945, Emperor Hirohito himself gets involved in this struggle and personally supports the creation of a peace plan, albeit next to a plan for defense to the very end. Eventually, the Japanese decide to contact the Soviets to mediate their surrender with the other allies. But the Brits and Americans believe this to be stalling tactics, partly because the Russians do not properly relay the sincerity of the Japanese attempts. And to be clear, these are sincere attempts. For the Japanese, by early August 1945, the only obstacle to surrender is the uncertain fate of the emperor. The generals and ministers of Imperial Japan have decided that peace is a valid option, but on one condition. The emperor must live and remain an integral and central part of any future Japanese state. For a number of reasons, they do not communicate this openly and clearly, and Truman is left to make his choice unaware of the real situation in Tokyo. His order to proceed if no surrender comes is issued on July 25th. On August 6th at approximately 2:45 a.m. local time, Enola Gay, a B-29 Superfortress from the 509th Composite Group of the United States Army Air Force, takes off from Tinian Island carrying the uranium-bombed little boy. She's heading for the city of Hiroshima under the command of Colonel Tibbets and a crew of 11 airmen. She's accompanied by two other B-29s, the Great Artiste and Necessary Evil. Hiroshima has been selected as a target for two main reasons. One, it is of strategic military importance, as the United States Bomber Strategic Survey USBSS explains. As the headquarters of the 2nd Army and of the Shogoku Regional Army, it was one of the most important military command stations in Japan, the site of one of the largest military supply depots, and the foremost military shipping point for both troops and supplies. And two, it is beside Kyoto, the only major Japanese city not in ruins at this point. In the city, the day begins like many in recent weeks, with an air raid alarm sometime between 7 and 7:15 a.m. Hiroshima had been getting such warnings almost every night for weeks, for at that time the B-29s were using Lake Biwa, northeast of Hiroshima, as a rendezvous point, and no matter what city the Americans planned to hit, the superfortresses streamed in over the coast near Hiroshima. The frequency of the warnings and the continued absence of the B-29s with respect to Hiroshima had made its citizens jittery. A rumor was going around that the Americans were saving something special for the city. At the same time, Hatsuyo Nakamura, a widow with 3 children, a 10-year-old boy, Toshio, an 8-year-old girl, Yaiko, and a 5-year-old girl, Mieko, awakes from the air raid sirens, which aren't yet sounding an urgent warning. She's tired and exhausted after getting herself and her 3 children up in the middle of the night because of a previous alert. After getting herself out of bed, she lights the stove in the kitchen and prepares some rice for her children. As she continues her preparation in the kitchen, shortly before 8 a.m., the radar operator in Hiroshima decides that the number of planes coming directly towards the city is very small, probably not more than 3, and the air raid alert is lifted. It is further announced on the radio that no raid is expected beyond some sort of reconnaissance. As the all-clear sounds, Hatsuyo Nakamura's children begin to stir in their bedrolls. As the all-clear is given, Kataoka Osamu, a 13-year-old boy, is already at school in the city center, enjoying the first class of the day. At 8:15 a.m. on August 6th, Enola Gay has reached its target and releases its payload, Little Boy. Some 40 seconds later, Futaba Kitayama, a 33-year-old housewife, is interrupted in her morning routine by a woman shouting while pointing at the sky, "A parachute is coming down!" As she turns to look in the direction, the city center of Hiroshima becomes incandescence. 1,900 feet, or 580 meters above the Shima Hospital in downtown Hiroshima, Little Boy ignites, and a giant fireball expands into a maximum diameter of 985 feet, or 300 meters, within a second. To those witnessing the explosion, suddenly there is only the brightest light. Almost instantaneously, the heat produced by the nuclear chain reaction grows many times hotter than the sun. Directly under the epicenter of the explosion, the heat exposure during the first 3 milliseconds is 900 times more searing than the heat from the sun. Even after the first 3 milliseconds have passed, the heat is still tremendous. 350 meters or 1,148 feet from ground zero, mica, minerals within certain types of stone, fuses on granite tombstones. Its melting point is 9,000 degrees centigrade or 16,232 Fahrenheit. At a distance of a kilometer or 5/8 of a mile, the surface of the local gray clay tiles bubbles and dissolves under the punishing heat. Its melting point is 1,300 degrees centigrade or 2,372 Fahrenheit. Even at a distance of 4 kilometers or 2.5 miles from the explosion, the heat is still strong enough to sear flesh and ignite clothing and paper. While the heat radiation travels at the speed of light, it is followed by a colossal shockwave that devastates the cityscape of Hiroshima. The shockwave is faster than the speed of sound. On average, it has a speed of 1,320 kilometers an hour or 820 miles per hour. So anyone caught in the blast never even hear the sound of the explosion before they are hit. In a 2-kilometer or 1.2-mile radius around the epicenter, the only buildings left standing, although battered, bruised, and charred, are the few ferro-concrete buildings like the Shima Hospital. For the citizens of Hiroshima, hell has manifested in their city. Since the all-clear was given just 15 minutes before the explosion, no one was in the shelters or even seeking shelter. The men, women, and children directly under the blast are not merely burned to death, they are instantaneously incinerated. The carbon remnants of their bodies are projected and imprinted onto walls, debris, and rubble by the shockwave. These shadows will now haunt the shattered remains of the inner city. As far as 1 kilometer, 5/8 of a mile from ground zero, everyone caught in the open is burnt alive, their charred corpses now littering the streets. Beside the carbonized bones, as far as 1.2 kilometers or 3/4 of a mile from the epicenter, thousands laid upon the streets in public squares with all layers of their skin burnt through, leading to certain death. Those who are saved from instant heat death are nevertheless thrown around like rag dolls by the shockwave, breaking bones, splitting skin, tearing muscle, and shattering their organs. Then there is the radiation, and the epicenter of the explosion. Everyone left unshielded is hit by 240 grays, or 24,000 rads. That is 35 times the radiation required to kill someone quickly, and 60 times the dose that kills 50% of those exposed after a week. Everyone at a radius of 1 kilometer or 5/8 of a mile from the epicenter receives 4 grays of radiation, the dose that will kill half of those exposed. In the next 10 days, the exposed will start to vomit, soon vomiting blood, develop high fevers and severe diarrhea, and most often die an agonizing death within 10 days. Beyond the kilometer radius, the dose still suffices to cause radiation poisoning and nausea, but not death, at least not in the immediate future. Now, all of this happens in mere seconds, and the survivors do not yet realize what has happened. Kataoka Usamo, near the epicenter, the 13-year-old boy in school, is surprised by the flash, the heat, and the shockwave in his classroom. Debris showers him, and he is partly buried under rubble. 4 of my classmates came crawling out from beneath the debris just as I had done. We went to the swimming pool. One of our classmates had fallen into the pool. He was already dead, his entire body burnt and tattered. Another was trying to extinguish the flames rising from his friend's clothes with the blood which spurted out of his own wounds. Some jumped into the swimming pool to extinguish their burning clothes, only to drown because their badly burned limbs had become useless. There were others with burns all over their bodies whose faces were swollen to 2 or 3 times their normal size, so they were no longer recognizable. I cannot forget the sight of those who could not move at all, who simply looked up at the sky, saying over and over, "Damn you, damn you." Hatsuyo Nakamura, the widow, on the other hand, is not staring at the sky, but at the ground once the explosion has passed over her. After everything flashed whiter than any white she had ever seen, she is catapulted through her home, followed by bits and pieces of her house, roughly 1.2 kilometers or 3/4 of a mile from ground zero. On the ground, battered and partly covered by the debris, the first thing she hears is, "Mother, help me," and sees her youngest, Mieko, the 5-year-old, buried up to her breast and unable to move. As Mrs. Nakamura started frantically to claw her way towards the baby, she could see or hear nothing of her other children. Then, from what seemed to be caverns far below, she heard 2 small voices crying, "Tasukete! Tasukete! Help! Help!" She called the names of her 10-year-old son and 8-year-old daughter. "Toshio! Yeiko!" Mrs. Nakamura abandoned Mieko, who at least could breathe, and in a frenzy made the wreckage fly above the crying voices. Fortunately, she is able to free her children from the rubble, and although they are filthy and bruised, they are alive and well. Meanwhile, countless other people who weep for their crushed spouses, children, and friends. Futaba Kitayama, the woman who turned towards the bomb as it exploded, experiences the heat firsthand. "I couldn't see anything. It seemed pitch dark. I managed to crawl out of the debris. Soon I noticed that the air smelled terrible. Then I was shocked by the feeling that the skin of my face had come off. Then the hands and arms too. Starting from the elbow to the fingertips, all the skin of my right hand came off and hung down grotesquely. The skin of my left hand, all 5 fingers, also came off. What happened to the sky that had been such a clear blue one only a moment ago? It was now dark, like dusk. I ran like mad towards the bridge, jumping over the piles of debris. What I saw under the bridge was shocking. Hundreds of people were squirming in the stream. I couldn't tell if they were men or women. They looked all alike. Their faces were swollen and gray. Their hair was standing up. Holding their hands high, groaning, people were rushing to the river. I felt the same urge because the pain was all over my body, which had been exposed to a heat ray strong enough to burn my pants to shreds. I was about to jump into the river when I remembered that I could not swim. How in the world could such a cruel thing happen? I wondered if the hell that my grandmother had told me so much about in my childhood had fallen upon the earth. A hell come down to earth that has only begun to inflict suffering on those caught within its fire. Like Futaba Kitayama, Hatsuyo Nakamura, and Kataoka Osamu, many tens of thousands survived the initial explosion. As they stagger through the veritable hellscape that was their former city, a new wind begins to rise up, originating from the opposite direction from whence the shockwave had come. As the imposing mushroom cloud rises into the atmosphere in anger for the first time in human history, the great volumes of hot air rising with it create a low pressure zone at ground zero. Soon this new wind reaches the force of a gale with speeds up to 40 miles per hour or 64 kilometers per hour. The wind is accompanied by big, heavy drops of rain beginning to fall in some parts of the city, hitting roughly 20% of the survivors. While these marble-sized drops seem to give relief to some of the burn victims, they have a more sinister effect. The black rain is full of radioactive pollutants, exposing yet more people in Hiroshima to ever-increasing radiation doses. At the same time, fires are kindled all over the city. Some originate from the heat radiation produced by the blast, which set fire to wood and other flammable materials across the city. These fires now find themselves in fields of rubble and wooden debris, an ideal fuel source for an ever-growing inferno. Yet, this is not the origin of most fires that start after the explosion. Most of Hiroshima's citywide fire is caused by inflammable wreckage falling on cook stoves and live wires throughout the city. Since the vast majority of Hiroshima was made up of traditional Japanese wooden structures, this inflammable wreckage is aplenty. Together, the separate fires burning all across the city, combined with the strong winds, soon create a raging firestorm, a conflagration of epic proportions at the heart of the city. This happens quickly, right after the initial explosion, and while day becomes night as clouds of dust and black smoke block out the sun, the second act of Hiroshima's tragedy begins. Within minutes, the survivors need to make hard choices. By now, Kataoka Osamu's gym teacher has found the children assembled at the swimming pool. He gave us directions and encouraged us in a firm voice, urging us to gather together our friends who had lost their sight or were badly injured and to leave the burning school building behind. There were others who could not move at all, and there were probably many who were still trapped beneath the burning ruins of the school. Were we to run away and leave them behind without caring at all? No, but there was nothing we could do, nothing. Friends, please forgive us. Johannes Siemes, a German Jesuit living at a novitiate at Nagasaki, 5 kilometers or 3.1 miles from ground zero, while making his way towards the inner city, reports similar impossible choices. The houses at the edge of the city are all severely damaged. Many have collapsed or burnt down. Further in, almost all of the dwellings have been damaged by fire. Where the city stood, there is a gigantic burnt-out scar. Frightfully burned people beckon to us. Along the way, there are many dead and dying. The cement structure of the local hospital is the only building that remains standing. Its interior, however, has been burnt out. It acts as a landmark to guide us on our way. Beneath the wreckage of the houses along the way, many have been trapped, and they scream to be rescued from the oncoming flames. They must be left to their fate. Added to those who perished in the immediate explosion from overpressure, the shockwave, the heat, and flying debris are those who die stuck in their former homes with broken bones, open injuries, or vomiting from radiation poisoning, screaming as they are slowly boiled and burned alive. This calamity sends thousands upon thousands more to their fiery graves. Under normal circumstances, these fires could be fought, the injured treated by doctors and bandages and ointments applied by nurses. But this is no ordinary bombing raid. The whole city has been taken out in one blast. The status of medical facilities and personnel dramatically illustrates the difficulties facing authorities. Of more than 200 doctors in Hiroshima before the attack, over 90% were casualties, and only about 30 physicians were able to perform their normal duties a month after the raid. Out of 1,780 nurses, 1,654 were killed or injured. Though some stocks of supplies had been dispersed, many were destroyed. Overall, only 3 out of 45 civilian hospitals could be used, and 2 large army hospitals were rendered unusable. Firefighting and rescue units were equally stripped of men and equipment. In Hiroshima, only 16 pieces of firefighting equipment were available for fighting the conflagration, 3 of them borrowed. Even if, by some miracle, all of Hiroshima's firefighters and firefighting equipment had survived the blast unscathed, it is unlikely that any public fire department in the world, even without damage to equipment or casualties to personnel, could have prevented development of a conflagration in Hiroshima or combated it with success at more than a few locations along its perimeter. The total fire damage would not have been much different. Overall, in a roughly 13 square kilometer or 5 square mile radius, everything that was not destroyed by the blast is reduced to ash and cinders by flame. The first proper, non-improvised rescue parties arrived 30 hours after the initial explosion on August 7th. By then, the death count has risen higher still, as many who could have survived with immediate treatment succumb to their grievous injuries. By then, the situation within the city of Hiroshima still is nothing short of hell on earth. Where the city stood, everything as far as the eye could reach is a waste of ashes and ruin. Only several skeletons of buildings completely burnt out in the interior remains. The banks of the river are covered with dead and wounded. On the broad street in the Hakushima district, naked burned cadavers are particularly numerous. Among them are the wounded who are still alive. A few have crawled under the burnt-out autos and trams. At the hospital, the wounded lie on the hard floor, row on row. Only the largest wounds are dressed. We cannot move everybody who lies exposed in the sun. It would be endless, and it is questionable whether those whom we can drag to the dressing station can come out alive, because even here, nothing really effective can be done. Later, we ascertained that the wounded lay for days in the burnt-out hallways of the hospital, and there they died. Luckily for Tsutomu Yamaguchi, another victim, his injuries, while largely left untreated, do not prevent him from fleeing the scene back to his employer in Nagasaki. He has survived the bombing of Hiroshima, partly because he was 3 kilometers, close to 2 miles away from ground zero. The day after the explosion, he, together with 2 colleagues, makes his way back to Nagasaki, his home. As he arrives on August 8th, his ruptured eardrums and the burns all over the upper left of his torso are finally treated. Even in this condition, he returns back to work the following day, August 9th. At 11 a.m., as he is describing the bombing of Hiroshima to his supervisor, the city center of Nagasaki also becomes incandescence. Fat Man, a plutonium bomb with an explosive force of 20 kilotons, 8 more than the uranium bomb dropped on Hiroshima, detonates. The same horrible tragedies that befell Hiroshima and its people 3 days earlier are now unleashed on Nagasaki and its citizens. First flash and heat and radiation, then shockwave, and finally inferno. Tens of thousands more die. But Tsutomu Yamaguchi survives again. He is one of 165 Nyu Hibakusha, or doubly bombed, individuals that survive both bombings. Even being the victim of only one of the bombs leaves you with shockingly low survival rate compared to conventional bombing. Before the war, Hiroshima had a population of 350,000. During the war, many, like soldiers and people anticipating bombings of the city, left, leaving an estimated 250,000 official residents in the city when the bomb dropped. But before that came many unofficial residents in their thousands, such as Korean forced laborers or soldiers stationed in Hiroshima, making it very difficult to arrive at any conclusive population number. The most recent estimates puts this back to the pre-war population of somewhere around 350,000. Of these, round about 140,000 are dead by December 1945. It is estimated that 66,000 to 80,000 are killed instantly and in the immediate hours after the explosion. those who were exposed to such high radiation levels that their DNA literally disintegrates within minutes of exposure, and those burnt alive in the ruinscape during the following firestorm. The USBSS states that a plausible estimate of the importance of the various causes of death would range as follows: flash burns 20 to 30%, other injuries 50 to 60%, radiation sickness 15 to 20%. Until December, somewhere between 60,000 and 74,000 more will die as a result of injuries sustained through the nuclear bomb, such as burns not treated because of lack of medical equipment, lethal radiation poisoning, and so on. Added to the overall figure of 140,000 dead is that of 78,000 injured. Nagasaki had a pre-war population of 270,000, and again we see the same fluctuation as in Hiroshima. So as Fat Man drops, somewhere between 195,000 and 270,000 people are in the city. By December 1945, 73,000 are dead. Roughly half, somewhere between 35,000 and 39,000, are killed instantly and in the immediate aftermath. The rest pass away until December for reasons similar to those in Hiroshima. On top of these, another 75,000 are injured. Less people are killed in Nagasaki, although Fat Man is significantly more powerful than Little Boy. In Hiroshima, trees were uprooted. In Nagasaki, they were snapped in half like twigs while standing. Fat Man also burned significantly hotter, roughly twice as hot at peak temperature. But the topography of Nagasaki is very different. The city lies at the head of a long, narrow bay, running up from which there is a mountain with a valley on either side. The city extends along both sides of the bay and up into the two valleys, thus roughly resembling the outlines of the letter X. The bomb was detonated over one of the valleys, in which there was a heavy concentration of war industry. This limited the scope of the damage suffered by Nagasaki and its inhabitants. Similarly, the ensuing fires were also less devastating, stopped by the natural barriers of the mountains and rivers in the city. I say less, but we are still speaking of a massive lethality. A lethality exacted on a nation that seemed to not give up its own massively lethal war of aggression and atrocity, but a lethality that does not primarily hit those waging that war. Because in both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the residents of both cities are mostly non-combatant civilians, including many women and children. Military combatants are only a minority. In the coming years and decades in both cities, the rates of leukemia and other types of cancer will rise drastically compared to other cities in Japan. With these deaths added, the overall number of people who die as a result of the atomic bombs exceeds 250,000 and could be as high as 350,000. More than 250,000 people killed by only 2 bombs. General Leslie Groves in the Manhattan Engineer District of the United States Army looked at the efficiency of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki by comparing them to the firebombing of Tokyo on March 9, 1945. On Tokyo, 279 planes dropped 1,667 tons of ordnance, killing a similar amount of people, but over a significantly larger area. On Hiroshima, 1 plane dropped 1, albeit very heavy bomb, which had 3 times the casualty and mortality rate per square mile in a significantly less densely populated city. If you take an average of 93 U.S. urban bombing runs, the difference is even starker. Little Boy destroyed 2.6 times the area, caused 15 times the number of mortalities, and 16 times the casualty rate over the same area. But do these deaths, at the very least, lead to an earlier end to the war? Well, as I explained, one of Truman's stated motives is that the bombs are justified because the invasion of the Japanese islands was unconscionable in terms of American casualties, given the expected frantic Japanese resistance. At the same time, the Japanese were almost ready to accept unconditional surrender, bar one condition: the future of the emperor must be secured. Truman, and by extension the United States, did not know this. For the rest of his life, Truman will remain adamant that this and only this was his reasoning, even arguing against the reports that show that the Japanese were ready to surrender, but failed to communicate it. This, unfortunately, leaves a lot of questions unanswered, and speculation continues to our day. One argument is that Truman, seeing Japan essentially defeated, wanted to ensure a capitulation and subsequent occupation before the Soviets entered the war and began carving up Manchuria. As this was expected any moment in early August, another reason to accelerate the surrender might have been geopolitical gain rather than the minimization of American casualties. Some scholars argue that if American casualties had been Truman's only concern, he should have waited to see how the Japanese reacted to the Soviet invasion of Manchuria, which was slated for August and happened the same day as Nagasaki was bombed. But the Japanese did not expect, until early 1946. That the Soviets begin their advance on the day of Nagasaki puts the decision to drop the bombs, especially the second bomb, into further question. Here, there are those who say that the Soviet invasion rather than the bombs pushed the Japanese to surrender, essentially making the bombings an act of redundancy in terms of geopolitical strategy, at least. Others again argue that the US also wanted to show the rest of the world, especially Stalin, that it had the bomb and what it meant. Whatever the reason, any argument that Truman is acting unaware and untouched by the tragedy of this choice are denied by his reply from August 7th to a telegram encouraging the use of as many nukes on Japan as possible. I know that Japan is a terribly cruel and uncivilized nation in warfare, but I can't bring myself to believe that because they are beasts, we should ourselves act in that same manner. For myself, I certainly regret the necessity of wiping out whole populations because of the pig-headedness of the leaders of a nation, and for your information, I am not going to do it unless absolutely necessary. But, then again, 2 days later, on the 9th, he answered a telegram asking for an immediate stop to nuclear bombing with, "The only language they seem to understand is the one we have been using to bombard them. When you have to deal with a beast, you have to treat him as a beast." Then, when Secretary of War Henry Stimson briefs Truman after his return from Potsdam, shows him pictures of Hiroshima and reports 100,000 mostly civilian deaths, Truman is reportedly shocked. Based on the target acquisition information from Stimson himself, the president had believed Hiroshima to be much more of a military target than it was. From there on out, probably racked by guilt, Truman reports frequent headaches and discomfort and makes up his mind about future U.S. nuclear strategy. Nuclear weapons should not be used as a regular weapon of war, and their use can only be authorized by the President of the United States of America. In any case, for the Japanese warhawks advocating the fight to the death, the bombs certainly offer a way out of the war without losing face or becoming hypocrites. The USBSS has drawn its own conclusions on the matter. The further question of the effect of the bomb on the morale of the Japanese leaders and their decision to abandon the war is tied up with other factors. It cannot be said, however, that the atomic bomb convinced the leaders who effected the peace of the necessity of surrender. The decision to surrender had been taken at least as early as 26th of June. The problem facing the peace leaders and the government was to bring about a surrender despite the hesitation of the war minister and the opposition of the Army and Navy chiefs of staff. The atomic bombings considerably speeded up these political maneuverings within the government. This in itself was partly a morale effect, since there is ample evidence that members of the cabinet were worried by the prospect of further atomic bombings, especially on the remains of Tokyo. The bombs did not convince the military that defense of the home island was impossible. It did permit the government to say, however, that no army without that weapon would possibly resist an enemy who had it, thus saving face for the army leaders. It is apparent that in the atomic bomb the Japanese found the opportunity which they had been seeking to break the existing deadlock within the government over acceptance of the Potsdam terms. To determine how many days, weeks, or even months of war the bombs saved the world from is impossible. If it wasn't for the massive death toll and tragedy it caused, in view of what follows, it is almost a quaint question. Pandora's box has been opened, and all the evil it contained has flown out into the world. Nothing will undo this discovery, and even as the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki become known to the world, we, humanity, will not temper our worst instincts and fears. The search for dominance, the struggle for ideological supremacy, and in fear of those who oppose and threaten us, we will perfect these weapons further. We will create bombs hundreds, even thousands of times more powerful than the ones from 1945. Bombs that in a single conflagration can wipe out not tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but millions of lives. In hardly more than a decade after these events, we will have acquired the capability of eradicating human life, most life of any kind, on the planet many times. Despite that we know the absolute devastating effect of a nuclear war, and that no sane person can even dream of launching such a conflict, despite that we swear they're not to be used only to deter someone else from using them, time and time again, by simple human error, strategic miscalculation, and accident, we will come very close. We will agree to stop testing them in the atmosphere and then not test them at all. Then we'll test anyway. We will agree to reduce the number of bombs, but never below a level that can't destroy the planet Earth many times over. And then new nations will develop their own bomb, and the great powers will again add more bombs to their stockpiles. In 2024, we will have reduced from the insane peak of 63,632 in 1985, we still have at least 12,119 nuclear warheads ready to be deployed, spread out across the United States, Russia, France, China, the United Kingdom, Pakistan, India, Israel, and North Korea. Instead of reducing that number further, we are now adding more. By some estimates, blowing up only 100 average-sized thermonuclear devices in the atmosphere simultaneously would cascade the world into an unstoppable chain reaction, making most of the planet uninhabitable for an unforeseeable future. We, as humanity, face many threats, but none as immediate as this one. We might not be able to turn back the clock to undo what has been discovered and done, but if we forget what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, if we forget that the power we can now yield is the power to end time for humanity, if we allow hatred and fear to guide us forward, if we do not stand resolute against aggression and disrespect for peaceful coexistence, if we do not find a way to reduce these arms to zero, we will sooner or later all become victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Never forget.